So yeah, welcome to the first panel of the Solactive ESG Fall Series 2020 on climate impact and corporate strategy. In today's session, we would like to discuss how impact on climate change can be made measurable by the so-called Xtc model developed by Wright based on science, and show real-life examples of how a corporate and a bank already make use of the Xtc in their climate strategies. My name is Jennifer Stedding from Solactive, and I would like to quickly introduce today's panelists. We have Dr. Laura Merwelskamper, who is co-heading the Impact, Transparency and Sustainability Unit at GLS Bank, and Thomas Seewald, who has already held several environmental management positions within Continental since 2000 already, and who is now heading environmental and climate protection on the Continental Group level. And last but not least, Hannah Helmke, who is co-founder and CEO of Wright Based on Science, who, as mentioned, has developed the Xtc model. And I think it will actually be a good starting point if maybe, Hannah, you can explain a little bit what is the idea behind the Xtc model, because everything we will discuss today will be based on that.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me for this panel. It's really a pleasure to be with you, especially speak with the people applying the Xtc model in totally different areas in order to understand and measure the climate impact and then also take decisions based on that. So the financial sector has become really one of the largest drivers for corporate climate action, and that is incredible. And so the financial sector is doing this with a wealth of metrics that is heavily debated. And temperature alignment, so the measurement of a degree Celsius number for companies or a financial portfolio, is emerging as one of the central metrics in this debate. And to give you a feeling for why this is the case, just imagine two companies in the same sector. One company is 1.5 degree compliant and the other one is 4 degree compliant. So who do you think has better access to talent? And who do you think is perceived to be the better business partner in the future for its clients? And who do you think, as a consequence, has better access to capital for the upcoming transition? So the Xtc model, the X degree compatibility model, is a methodology calculating those temperature alignment metrics. It is an economic climate impact model which measures the contribution of a single economic entity. That can be a company, it can be a financial portfolio, it can be a real estate object, it can be a sovereign bond, to climate change under various scenarios until 2050. And as the real economy is the key lever, is the key player in the transition to a well below 2 degree world, we have designed the Xtc model in a way that it really speaks the language of corporate decision makers. In our experience and in our opinion, those decision makers, for them, the dialogue on climate, the conversations around climate are increasingly turning into a commercial debate around how to take business development decisions, what investments to take in order to survive in the future as a company having, or as a company remaining the license to operate. So so our Xtc model determines that temperature alignment based on the decoupling of emissions and economic success. So the more a company learns to decouple its emissions from economic activity, so the less emissions a company needs in order to create value, the lower the temperature and the stronger the narrative of the company about its contribution to reaching the Paris Climate Agreement. Unfortunately, such metrics are more and more demanded by all kinds of relevant stakeholders of a company. It's not only the investors, it's also upcoming talent, it's the employers themselves of the company, it's society, academia, and also regulation. And this is the area where we are working with both corporate actors, but also with the financial market. We're still on mute, Jenny.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for providing this context. Could you explain a little bit how you really calculate that number, how that works?
Absolutely. So what we do, I try to explain this as simple as possible. What we do is that we determine the economic emission intensity of a company. So we determine for a year, let's say 2018, how many emissions does a company need in order to create 1 million euros of gross value added. Gross value added is the company-specific equivalent to GDP. So what emissions does my business model depend on? That economic emission intensity, we then project until 2050 under various scenarios. So how does the emission intensity develop under different sets of assumptions until 2050? And then we're taking this, this consolidated economic emission intensity and scale it up by the global GDP. So by the global gross value added, in order to calculate what amount of emissions would be created, would reach the atmosphere if everyone would be as emission intensive as the company under consideration. And that amount of emissions then goes into a climate model. So it's entered into a climate model, and that climate model tells us what is the resulting level of global warming that would result from that amount of emissions reaching the atmosphere that would be created if all companies operated as emission intensively as the one under consideration in the chosen scenario. And we do this with not only the company or the other economic entity, we also do this with a sector-specific economic emission intensity and a sector-specific target economic emission intensity to create the kind of benchmarks that we need in order to cover and consider sector-specific particularities when it comes to a company's ability to decarbonize.
Okay, so that means the result in the end really is a degree Celsius number and not just a score like this company has a score of XYZ, but if all companies in the world would work as emissions intensively as company A, then we would see a global warming in 2050 by, let's say, 3 degrees. So it's really something tangible, as I understand it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And the good thing is we already can now see 2 use cases of that, and I guess that will also help everyone understand it a lot better. But before we explore how Continental is using the XTC, maybe Thomas, you could outline a little bit why this is an important topic for Continental in the first place, and what is your motivation behind it?
Yeah, thank you for introduction, Jennifer. I think, first of all, it's important to know that Continental had a long history of environmental protection strategy behind, but we saw definitely during the last years with the upcoming changes in society, with the upcoming changes on the politics side, with the Paris Agreement, that we need really to rethink about our strategy, our business cases, and so on. So in the past, we developed a strategy which was based on specific targets like CO2 emissions based on sales, because we were a very fast growing company. But in the end, it shows up that this is not enough, that we really have to change our thinking and our acting. And therefore, we developed now a new environmental strategy with clear reduction targets on absolute level. So our target is to reduce, for example, CO2 emissions from electricity already in 2020 by 100%. So we change now the complete purchasing process in direction of renewable 100. And we want to be carbon neutral production in 2040 already. And therefore, I think it was very important to incorporate these topics like carbon neutrality along the entire value chain, as well emission-free mobility and industry as part of the sustainability strategy. So now we have, I will say, clear focus topics in the sustainability strategy of our company, with a clear focus on climate management and climate protection. And that was, I would say, as well, the starting point where we get together with Right Based on Science.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, Continental is a really large company, and you have decided to partner with Right Based on Science. No offense, but it's a small startup. But what made you really go into that direction? I think that's kind of brave, and it's great that you're looking into really innovative things, how to tackle this topic. How do you, in which context do you work together, and how do you use the XTC?
Yeah, as I mentioned at that time, where we were in preparation for the new environmental strategy with this clear zero emission targets for the company, our management also was aware that we have to foster here as well connections to other companies and to develop maybe new ideas and perspective on this topic. And Right Based on Science was recognized by our CEO. So we had a kickoff meeting together with the CEO, together with Hannah, to discuss what is behind the Xtc model. And as well me and as well Dr. Degenhardt were very interested in. And so we decided at that time, okay, let's start a cooperation, a strategic cooperation to bring our big global acting company in, and as well the knowledge from Right Based on Science with this very new perspective on climate management to steer and to develop maybe new models within the company. And that was the starting point to collaborate here with the Xtc model.
Great. And do you already apply the XTC, or are you still more in a developing phase?
No, I think it was, as I mentioned, a cooperation process. And so we started with a project plan, what maybe is interesting for us and as well for Right in the development of this tool. First of all, we want to really clarify which XTC we have. Which impact has the new strategy in comparison to the old strategy. And for instance, it was very important also to understand how the different business areas of Continental contribute to our environmental strategy. You know, we have a very diverse product portfolio. On the one hand side, we have tires, where I think Continental is well known and very famous. But there's a huge portion of automotive electronic parts, and so totally different production conditions. And therefore, it was very interesting to see what is the contribution of each business area for the entire strategy of our group.
Okay, that's really interesting that you can really use the XTC model for economic entities and not just a company as a whole. And I guess that's also the powerful part about it. Before we dive further into what might be challenges, etc., I'd be super curious to also hear from Laura and GLS Bank's point of view. Yeah, what is your motivation to address the topic, and how do you work with Right Based on Science and use the XTC as a bank?
Thank you very much also for the invitation. I'm also pleased to be here. And as Hannah already mentioned in the beginning, the financial sector plays a crucial role in regarding the Paris Agreement and reaching the 1.5-degree target. And as every investment and financing decision has an impact on climate, whether negative or positive, we as GLS Bank wanted to know in how far we are contributing in reaching the 1.5-degree target and how we are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And so we started to measure the carbon dioxide emissions of our loan and investment portfolio. But then what does it tell you if you have a carbon dioxide footprint of, let's say, as a bank, 125, 760 tons? It doesn't tell you anything. It might be a high number for one, for the others not. You can compare yourself with another bank, and then you maybe see you're better than a benchmark. But is being better than a benchmark really good? Is it good in the context of the Paris Agreement? You can't say it. You can't. An absolute number of carbon dioxide doesn't tell you anything about your alignment with the Paris Agreement. And so that was the point for us to start the collaboration together with Right Based on Science in order to get an answer for this question. are we in line with the Paris Agreement, or the other way around, by how much warming would result from the emissions that we are financing within our loan portfolio, but also within our investment processes.
Again on mute. So since we will have next week another panel that is really focusing on how can the XTC be incorporated in the investment process, I would be more curious to hear about like what is the difference like when you assess which projects you want to finance. I assume it's a lot more tricky to get an XTC for a project or a smaller firm instead of a big corporation where you maybe want to invest into. Could you maybe give us some background there?
Yes, of course. That was indeed a challenge for us because especially within our loan portfolio, we have many, or most of the companies we are financing are very small businesses, small companies, and they don't report a carbon footprint. Maybe they even don't know their own carbon footprint. And so it was difficult for us. We couldn't simply get back to data which is reported, or even asking the companies would be or was no solution for us. And so we decided to take sector averages. But then there was the next challenge, because we as a social and environmental bank, or bank with a sustainability focus, we would have highly overestimated the emissions of our clients if we had taken simply sector averages. As an example, we only finance renewable energy. Taking the emissions average of the energy sector would have been much too high. So there was a large challenge for us, and we overcome this challenge by working together with the Wuppertal Institute, scientific institute here in Germany, in order to get much more specific emission factors for the sectors that we are financing. So a specific emission factor for renewable energy, or for ecological agriculture, for example, because it was all different from the whole sector average. For agriculture, for example. And that was for us the input, or the basis input factor, which was then taken as input for the Xtc model. So our approach was mainly twofold. First, calculating the emission factors specifically for our loan portfolio, and then taking this as input factors for the Xtc model.
Right. Sounds like you're really putting a lot of effort into it, but also it can really make a huge impact if you as a bank can say, okay, we will only finance companies that are doing some efforts into being greener, let's put it that way. But imagining there was a project that is maybe based on the XTC not compatible, so you could not finance it, but it's maybe has some great other benefits, like for society or something like that. How do you handle such cases?
I think you definitely need a holistic approach, because we have many companies being maybe, I guess, not really 2-degree compatible at the moment, especially from social sectors. And for a kindergarten or a school or a home for elderly people, carbon dioxide was not in the focus for the last, or has not been in the focus for the last years. And it's okay. Yeah, there are different topics, social topics, that are in the main focus of the companies. Nevertheless, we as a whole society, we as a bank, have the responsibility to reach the 1.5-degree target. And so we need to look for measures, for a plan, and how we can together go the way of transformation, how we can together reduce the emissions. And we as a bank, we can go the way with our clients, with new financing possibilities, but also with consulting possibilities, so that we can together go the way down and reduce the emissions, so that the company is then 2-degree compatible, 1.5-degree compatible.
Okay, yeah, sounds like a really good approach. Makes a lot of sense. Thomas, what challenges have you faced during the process? I mean, you are mostly looking at your own companies within your group, but I can imagine that you also have faced some challenges.
Yeah, for sure. It's not easy to make really a complete transformation in the strategy, because you need money for this, for sure. Nothing is for nothing. So it's very important really to understand, first of all, what are the main problems in your company and where you have to start with. When we talk about the different scopes of emissions, I think, and you see it in the strategy, we start first of all with that what is very easy to tackle. So the scope 2 emissions from electricity, we change now, as I mentioned, to renewable 100. So with this, we have an impact of the reduction of 70%. For scope 1 and 2 already in this year, 2020, which is really, I think, a great achievement. But I think this is housekeeping as well to tackle the scope 1 emissions, because this is something what you can influence yourself. You have direct options to choose which electricity you want to purchase, as well in which energy sources you want to go in regards of direct emissions. So if you want, for example, to choose biogas or so on, this is easy to tackle. But I think the next step beyond to influence the entire value chain, that is really important. And here I think also the Xtc model helps a lot, because as well scope 3 emissions is part of the Xtc at the end, what you have as company. And for us, for sure, the main challenges in the moment really to identify where are the most important topics in the value chain, what can we influence, and what is our final target, or how we can reach our final target in 2050 to have a carbon neutral value chain for our company. So that is clear, the commitment what we did. And I think here you need clear data, a clear overview, and transparency, I think, is very important in the entire process. And come back to an example. With this collaboration with RIDE, we start as well to have a deeper look on investments, for example, in energy equipment. So we use this Xtc model to compare, for example, different techniques or installations on big tire plants. What is the contribution of this investment to the entire Xtc of the company, so that we have here as well something where we can find really comparison models between different investments.
That sounds super interesting. Hannah, do you maybe also want to share some insights from your perspective, maybe especially or directly referring to this specific example?
Yeah, so that example was really a very interesting use case that we also agreed on as a part of this strategic partnership. So we were interested in how far we can create an alternative KPI for investment decisions. So we have the traditional net present value financial KPIs, but can we add another KPI that increases the transparency of climate-related risks and opportunities for that investment? So we looked at whether this new economic activity which is being financed, is the value creation which is emerging from that new economic activity, is it sufficiently decoupled from emissions in order to support the temperature target of Continental? And I found it really great to have all the different stakeholders in that project. So controlling was involved, the site managers were involved, Thomas' team was involved, and together we had those many perspectives on whether such a calculation makes actually sense or not. That was an open question. So the big question when we presented the results was, does it make sense? Does it create any added value for you? I think that experience was really interesting. We faced some challenges, some data-related challenges, some conceptual challenges, but eventually we found yeah, we found good solutions, and that makes me quite confident that we can apply the Xtc model to those also smaller entities within a company, which it needs in order to steer towards Paris Agreement.
Yeah, and that would.
Yeah, and maybe to add this, I think if you introduce environmental strategy or a climate strategy for a company, it's very important that you can break down the targets and that you find possibilities to compare different projects and investments to have a decision proposal for the management. And if we add now an additional sustainability index to an investment, I think this contributes as well to the transformation of a company behavior. And I think that's also very important.
Yeah, that sounds extremely powerful, extremely powerful. Okay, I'd also like to invite the audience to ask questions. We will get to that later, but you can already start using the Q&A section if there are any topics you would like to have covered in addition or any additional questions. Hannah, maybe if we look a little bit into the future, I mean, there's already, we already covered some examples and think that you still want to do and develop, and also together with these strategic partners. Is there anything else, any other use cases you can think of, or what is the current focus of Right Based on Science?
So when I speak about the focus of RIGHT, I always go back to the mission of RIGHT Based on Science. So the mission of RIGHT is to increase transparency on climate-related risks and opportunities, because we're pretty sure that the market is full of people who are willing to make things in a different way. We're pretty sure that there is enough competency and willpower and structure to really allocate capital in a different way. And the strategic partners that we've been having right now or so far, and also the other customers that we've been having so far, are really supporting that hypothesis. So when you have that transparency, or when you have that mission, you have quite a broad range of use cases and stakeholders, because arguably everyone is affected by climate change. So everyone is exposed to climate-related risks and opportunities. So everyone could benefit from a bit more transparency on what might come in the future. So our main challenge is definitely to understand how can we focus and what should we focus on. And for the tech team of Right Based on Science, we're going to focus on the assessment of governance bonds. So we're going to calculate the XTC of governance bonds, so the degree Celsius figure of countries, in order to cover this asset class, as it's quite a large asset class in financial portfolios. And we will also go into real estate. So what's quite interesting is what is the degree Celsius number of a single object, and how can a whole portfolio of real estate objects be aggregated to a portfolio XTC, and how can companies then benefit from those very, very particular assessments in their real estate objects. And on the business side, we really focus on measuring the corporate, or the Paris compatibility of corporate investments. So we're absolutely convinced that the corporate side needs to much more intensively collaborate with the financial markets. And in order to do this effectively, we need this one language, we need this one methodology with which the company can steer investment decisions, but with which the financial market can also understand, am I investing in this transition or not? This is going to be our focus from both the technical team and also the corporates team for the next phase of RIGHT.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I mean, when you mention it's one of RIGHT's mission to provide this tool for everyone to speak the same language, I think this panel is already a good demonstration of that, because we have a company, a corporate, we have a bank, we have an index provider, we have jointly created this index to make it investable, and we all can understand each other and can understand what an XTC means. I think the next step will also to really roll this out and make everyone understand it. But I think you've already come quite far, and it seems like your strategic partners are really committed. And yeah, Laura, maybe what from your perspective would need to happen? Is it that only the databases needs to improve, but are there also other things that you would need to also as GLS Bank to roll this further out?
Yes, I think data availability is one large topic. But I think from a bank perspective, we would also need an adaptation within all the systems that we are using. So systems for our ratings, systems where we can input the data. And I think all those systems are at the moment not well developed for integrating climate-related risks or even opportunities, but there's a lot to do, I think, in order to have the possibility to integrate those data in the regular processes, also in rating processes, credit decisions, and so on. I think that's a large topic as well. Maybe from an asset or investment perspective, as Hannah mentioned, government bonds and the Xtc for those, that would be a great step also for us. We have other challenges, for example, green bonds, how to calculate the Xtc of green bonds. So that would be a great topic, and is also one topic where we are collaborating on. But yes, data availability and the systems within a bank to integrate the Xtc in all the decision processes, that would be a great step forward.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Let me quickly check if there are already some questions from the audience. Maybe a rather simple one, and that could make everything a little bit more tangible. Like, what is the Xtc of Continental? Can you share that?
Yeah, for sure. So we had the baseline Xtc of 4.5 degrees. That was, I would say, the Xtc at that time where we used the old strategy. And with the new strategy, which was introduced now end of 2019, we had the 2.9 degrees, which is 1 degree below the sector target. And this shows that we really did some great improvement here. So we were able really to bring the Xtc below the sector target, which is fully in alignment of the Paris Agreement and with what is our clear commitment, what we did with the sustainability strategy. So yes.
Okay, and another one, not related to the Xtc, is there within the industry, for example, your counterparty or counterpart of another company, are you in contact? Do you discuss what each company is working on? Or is it more like every company looks at itself and tries to improve?
Is it in my direction?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think for sure we look outside Continental and we try to do benchmarks. Maybe you know the What If report, which was also created by Right Based on Science of the DAX 30 companies, where we saw that Continental here was really in the leading position with the new targets we set. But for sure, there are different sources where we really try to compare us with our competitors. And I think that's also important in the direction to our customers to show them clearly what our pathway to carbon neutrality is, and that we are really an attractive supplier for them. And if you have a look now in the automotive industry, most of the OEMs really have defined clear targets for the supply chain, and we are part of the supply chain as tier 1 supplier. So it's very important that we communicate these success story we started last year, which helps us really to bring us in a leading position of the automotive industry with this. And XTC, for sure, if you compare other companies, it always helps to judge this a little bit more.
Yeah, and now is it the same in the banking sector, or what is your experience?
Yeah, there are some initiatives who have set a combined or a general commitment to the Paris Agreement. One is on the UN level. There we have within the Principles for Responsible Banking one group who has set a climate target, and we have also the same on a level within an alliance for value-based banks, and both have set a climate target and want to align also with the Paris Agreement. And we have also a platform on carbon accounting financials, which was founded by Dutch banks and who have developed a common methodology in order to have a standard for carbon accounting. But I think what is missing up to now is a common understanding on how to measure the alignment. So I think exactly the step from how do we come from a carbon footprint to a number which tells me something about the alignment with the Paris Agreement, that is missing. And I think that the Xtc can play a crucial role within answering that question. And it's just one step further. So PCAF would be a great basis for banks in order to calculate a carbon footprint. And then we need another step, and that's, in my opinion, the Xtc, in order to get an answer on how is the alignment with the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, Hannah, sounds like you will not get bored during the next months and years. So much to do. We have a question from the audience regarding challenges on data availability. To which extent does Right Based on Science incorporate external data, including social media data?
So we use external data. So we use emission data from an external source, so from a third-party provider called Argentum, and we use financial data from a third-party provider from FactSet Research Systems. So when we determine the XCC of a portfolio, and we sometimes have thousands of companies in a universe, we need to make sure that we have consistent data available from one framework that we understand, so we know how to interpret the values. And this is why we're using this third data provider for emission data and financial data. But this is just emission data. So that's scope 1, 2, 3 emission data, including the information whether this data comes from own modeling of this third data provider or whether it was reported. So we have a very good transparency on something like the data quality, you could call it. Or the data sources. There is no social media data involved in this emission data. So maybe it would be possible to add another comment on what kind of data this refers to. But to my knowledge, this is just emission data based on reported emissions from those companies, and then using sector-specific factors to upscale emission data for those categories where the companies don't report emission data for, and this big set of emission data from the consistent framework we receive from Argentum to use for our calculations to make metrics comparable.
Okay, good. So at the moment, there are no further questions. There's still the possibility, but I'd like to ask the three panelists if there's anything else you would like to add, something we have not asked, or where you say, okay, this is something I definitely want to tell or ask.
Maybe what I'm really looking for is to integrate different scenarios. I don't know, maybe Hannah want to tell us something about it, but from what is interesting from our perspective is the possibility also to integrate, for example, targets of companies, but not only scenarios whether the companies reach their own targets or not, but also macroeconomic scenarios. So what would be the effect if, I don't know, let's say Corona lasts for a much longer time and emissions stay low, or if we have a faster recovery than assumed and emissions go up again very highly. So these are different scenarios, and the Xtc model is able to integrate those scenarios. And I think that's a very, very interesting point, and I'm really looking forward to integrate that one into our models also for the loan portfolio, but also in terms of sustainability risks, climate risks, also a point that Hannah has already mentioned, and how we can use also the Xtc model in order to get an impression about the transition risks of our companies, because the Xtc tells us very good how dependent the business model is from CO2 emissions. And I think that's one big point in order to get an impression about the transition risks of a company as well. So these are two sides, I think, that are very, very interesting.
Maybe I can add something to those points. So these are exactly the kind of R&D projects that we're collaborating on with our strategic partners. So both the scenario analysis piece is extremely interesting and important. What we need to figure out is what economic model fits with those kinds of requirements. So we're currently looking at different macroeconomic models in order to understand how they are working on covering climate-related aspects. We've done some academic collaboration with some of those institutes already, and the goal is definitely to connect our Xtc model to an established macroeconomic model, so that users like Laura can say, okay, what if we had another Corona event? What if GDP would shrink again? Or what if we had only a slow recovery? What if? So using those macroeconomic drivers for stimulating the economic success of a company and its carbon footprint, that would be incredibly interesting to understand under what conditions does a company develop on a Paris-aligned pathway. And that is a big task, but since Wright has now recently hired economists who are already into the subject, I am pretty confident we can take interesting steps here quite soon. And in terms of this climate risk topic, that is now something that is heavily debated in the financial markets. So is climate impact a different story from climate risks? So if my portfolio, if my credit portfolio has a high or a low climate impact, what does it mean for risk? Is it two separate stories, or is it one story? And in the logic of the Xtc model, this is one story. So if I am 4-degree compliant and the market understands this, the market will react. So that means a high impact on climate change has a material effect on the financial performance on a company. And a high climate impact is already a signal for low performance on the capital markets. So end of October, and maybe I can add this to something that we're currently focused on. End of October, we will release a white paper that has done an analysis whether in investment portfolios, and that refers now to investment, but I'll mention this here because it will add to the risk analysis that we do with GLS Bank. That companies who have a high negative Xtc gap, so who are far away from their target Xtc in a positive sense, so who underscore the target Xtc a lot, they perform much better on the financial market. So we did this with a back test together with Solactive, so that was a joint analysis, and we have come to the conclusion that there is a factor. So we found a factor that portfolio managers can use to increase or to seize opportunities and to reduce risks. So in the logic of the Xtc model, which is also the logic of the Green Deal, risks and performance, they belong together. And I think that will be quite a valuable starting point for going into risk analysis and understanding the transition risks much, much better, so that they can then be integrated into those central systems.
Perfect, thanks. We have some more questions now. Are there any plans to open source the Xtc model in the future?
Yes, there are plans to open source the Xtc model. End of 2021, the Xtc model will be open source, which means nobody owns it anymore, everyone can use it. What needs to be differentiated is that the Xtc model will be open source, but not our software. So the software that we use for understanding the climate impact in different scenarios, so the software that Continental is using and that GLS Bank is using, that will not be open source. But our goal is to attract all kinds of experts to contribute to the improvement of those kinds of methodologies, and to enable a transparent and science-based standard. And this is only possible if you can afford maximum transparency, and if you go open source, and if you invite anybody to work in one language on this huge topic. And that also means that other people can use it for their business models. So we have to focus on execution, building the best software, go into that competition instead of protecting this and selling black boxes. This is nothing that will enable the transition, which is of course a huge challenge also for us. But I think there is more important things than our short-term profitability here. Yeah.
And another one, should an analysis by right based on science result in a major negative temperature alignment? Do you envisage to also present concrete solutions?
Mm-hmm. So a negative temperature alignment would be a company that creates value by sucking emissions out of the air, for example. So a company that whose business model is based on negative emission technologies. Because we say, what if everybody needed as many emissions as the company under consideration to create value? We have not had the case yet, but we have had those cases like Continental, which have a negative Xtc gap, we call it. So which are those kinds of transition companies that under the scenario that they reach their climate target are much better than their sector-specific target requires. So we have those two negative numbers, a negative Xtc, which we haven't had so far. So we would need a company building negative emission technologies, but then this negative Xtc gap, which is this signal of, in terms of climate, future-proof company. Yeah.
Okay, good. We do not have any additional questions, and I think we have already covered a lot in today's session. So I would like to thank the three panelists. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for being so open and sharing. Yeah, Hannah?
I still have one question to Thomas.
Yeah, I see it also. So there's one question.
Sorry.
Yeah, how big is the effort of collecting the data input for such a large company? And especially from a corporate perspective, how difficult it is, for example, to collect Scope 3 emissions. Yeah, for sure it's difficult, and we have to distinguish between Scope 1 and 2, which we have a global KPI system installed where each location inputs the data on monthly basis. So we have a very clear picture about Scope 1 and 2 emissions related to our own operations. This is something which is finally then in the corporate reporting to the executive board, and our steering tool related to our environmental strategy. For Scope 3 emissions, we orientating us on the greenhouse gas protocol. So we're using all the categories. Some of them are really real data collected by supply chain, logistics, and so on. But for sure, when we're talking about the big portion of use phase of our products, then we use calculation tools to model these data, and I think they are not completely accurate, but they give a right direction on which levels of Scope 3 emission we have to work on. And that is, I think, the biggest advantage here. If you work with tools which are well established in the market, you really have at the end a very good database to start the activities and programs on the different categories of Scope 3 to reduce here the impact in the future. So it's difficult, but I think we have a very well established system in the meantime, which is in addition yearly approved by our KPMG audit. So we have a reasonable assurance for Scope 1 and 2 and limited assurance for Scope 3, which shows that the data base is very accurate here.
Yeah, that was indeed a very good question. So good you spotted that. But I think now we have answered all the open questions. So yeah, thanks a lot to the audience for your attention, and thanks a lot to our panelists for taking the time. It was super interesting, and it looks like you've already contributed a lot, and it's great to see that you want to drive change and make an impact. There's still a lot to be done, as we have also learned today, so it will not get boring, and we're looking forward to see even more. I'd like to also bring the attention to our panel next week, which will also feature Right Based on Science. So we will also talk about the Xtc model, but we will focus on how it can be integrated in the investment process. So we will have panelists from the portfolio management side. You're all invited to join that one. We would be happy to see you again. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.